Here's a fact you probably won't hear in meetings. Every hour you spend manually building GRC reports increases your risk of error and compliance gaps. The truth is those spreadsheets and copy-paste jobs might be the weakest link in your governance process. The good news? Power Automate can connect all your sources of truth and generate reports that are consistent, timely, and auditable. In this video, I'll break down how to build this automation from scratch so you'll never stress over end-of-month reporting again. Why manual GRC reports are a bigger risk than you think. Picture this for a moment. Your team spends 3 weeks collecting evidence, copying numbers between spreadsheets, formatting charts, and stitching everything together into a polished report. By the time it finally makes its way to leadership or the auditors, the data is already outdated. And worse, buried somewhere in those neat-looking tables sits a small error, a wrong date, a missing entry, or a misaligned column that could raise a red flag in the next audit. That's the hidden cost of manual GRC reporting. On the outside, it looks like careful, detailed work, but underneath it often hides a level of risk that the process itself was supposed to prevent. Most compliance teams still live inside Excel during report season. Some use a combination of spreadsheets and shared drives, while others layer in a few forms or internal trackers. It feels comfortable. After all, spreadsheets have been the backbone of operational reporting for decades. But comfort doesn't equal reliability. Every manual step in the process, whether it's retyping a number or emailing a draft back and forth, creates another chance for inconsistency. The irony is striking. The very reports meant to prove compliance introduce their own compliance risks when they're built this way. You've probably seen this contradiction firsthand. Teams spend more hours double-checking than they do analyzing. Managers reviewing reports assume the manual effort makes them thorough, but in practice, what gets delivered is often incomplete. A control looks fine until you compare it with the log from another system. An incident doesn't appear until after the report is signed off. And by the time those discrepancies are noticed, it's too late. The official report is already filed or in someone's inbox as a PDF attachment. The sense of accuracy is mostly an illusion. There are well-documented examples of compliance gaps being exposed weeks or even months too late. A manufacturing firm, for example, once discovered that one of its suppliers had missed a critical certification renewal. The compliance report showed everything was fine, but that report had been pulled together at the end of the previous quarter. By the time auditors asked questions, the renewal had already lapsed. The correction process was expensive and reputationally damaging, not because the regulations themselves were neglected, but because the reporting cycle lagged so far behind reality. Out-of-date inputs produced a false sense of security. The hidden costs start to pile up well before those disasters become public. Think of the analyst who spends 10 hours cross-checking numbers that could have been automatically validated, or the compliance officer who edits footnotes across multiple files because formats don't align. Those aren't just annoyances. They're hours your organization is paying for without getting real value. Add in the opportunity cost. Instead of analyzing trends or advising leadership on emerging risks, skilled professionals get pulled into endless cycles of reformatting and reconciling. Over time, that bottleneck doesn't just slow down compliance. It slows down decision-making across the business. Hybrid work has only amplified the problem. Data now lives across different locations and systems. A ticket might originate in a service desk tool, evidence may sit in SharePoint, while financial risks are tracked inside a separate Excel sheet. When teams were sitting in the same office, at least you could walk over and chase down an update. Now, with distributed workforces and cloud-based tools, it takes even longer to line everything up. The sprawl of systems has turned GRC into a data scavenger hunt. Every manual report depends on piecing together fragments, each stored in its own silo with its own quirks. At that point, inefficiency is no longer just an annoyance, it's a business risk. Missing a single compliance trigger could mean failing an audit, paying a fine, or losing credibility with investors. Even if none of that happens, the drain on resources chips away at strategic momentum. A leader can't react quickly to changing regulations if their data takes a month to surface. A board can't properly understand operational risks if the report in front of them represents last quarter's reality instead of today's. Put simply, the cost of manual GRC reporting is measured not only in wasted effort but also in reduced agility. This is why clinging to manual reporting methods isn't sustainable. It's not about convenience or workload anymore. Automation is becoming a survival strategy for organizations that need accurate, consistent insights delivered at the speed work actually happens. Power Automate isn't just another tool, it's the kind of system that allows compliance reports to keep pace with the business itself, which raises the real question. What exactly makes up a GRC report, and how does automation turn all those scattered pieces into something clear and reliable? That's where we're headed next. What really goes into a GRC report? Most people think of a GRC report as a single polished PDF that gets attached to an email and sent around for review. On the surface, that sounds right. It's a report after all. But in reality, what gets bundled into that file is far more complex. A proper GRC report pulls together evidence for controls, entries from a risk register, an ongoing log of incidents, plus various performance and compliance metrics from different platforms. Each one of those parts tells a story about the state of compliance at a particular moment, and none of it originates from a single source. And that's why treating it like a static PDF misses the bigger picture of what's actually required to produce it. Think about the control evidence first. These are records proving that policies or safeguards are actually in place. They might include screenshots, log extracts, or test results capturing whether a security measure is active. Then you've got the risk register, which usually tracks potential threats, likelihoods, and their impact. On top of that comes incident logs, often generated by ticketing systems or case management tools, which show what's gone wrong and how it's being handled. Add performance data from monitoring tools or business systems, and suddenly the report looks less like one simple document and more like an attempt to summarize the health of an entire compliance ecosystem. Here's the problem. All those elements come from different platforms, and most of those platforms don't talk to each other naturally. Control evidence might be sitting in a SharePoint folder. Risk entries could be captured in an Excel file that the compliance team maintains. Incident logs may live in Dataverse or another system of record, and performance metrics might live in a dashboard managed by a completely different department. They're all critical, but each is living its own life in its own silo. Pulling them together isn't straightforward. It's closer to manually wiring separate circuits together and hoping the lights all stay on. Trying to make that work is a lot like being told to cook a meal where each ingredient is stored in a different building. The rice is in one location, the vegetables in another, and the spices locked in someone else's pantry across town. You spend more time running back and forth than you do preparing the meal. That's the burden compliance teams carry every reporting cycle. The data exists, but it's scattered. Building the report means spending endless hours just moving pieces into one place before you can even think about analyzing or presenting the findings. In most organizations, SharePoint lists end up serving as both dumping grounds and staging areas for evidence. Excel sheets get used because they're accessible even though they lack true integration. Dataverse might power incident and issue tracking, but it rarely gets linked properly to the Excel sheets or SharePoint evidence. Without something connecting them, the reporting process turns into a patchwork effort. Each evidence file gets uploaded manually. Each risk entry gets copied over by hand. Incidents are summarized in yet another format. The more steps involved, the more likely inconsistencies creep in. And those inconsistencies aren't minor. Teams are forced to reconcile files where column names don't match or timestamps don't use the same format. Evidence is revalidated because no one quite trusts whether the most current version was captured. Incident numbers might be logged differently depending on the day or the analyst. Hours of time are spent cleaning, validating, and stitching things together. That's highly skilled labor being wasted on housekeeping instead of actual governance work. The burden falls on compliance analysts, but the impact is felt across the business when decision-making slows down. This is where the role of automation becomes clear. If gathering and normalizing the data is half the battle, then Power Automate is the missing connection that makes it possible. It's not replacing SharePoint, Excel, or Dataverse. Instead, it acts as the orchestrator that listens to each of those systems, grabs the right pieces in real time, and organizes them in a consistent way. Instead of a scavenger hunt, you get a pipeline. Data flows where it needs to go without constant human intervention. That shift sounds simple, but it changes the entire reporting experience. The takeaway here is that until you understand the anatomy of a GRC report, you can't understand why automation is so valuable. It's not just about outputting a nicer PDF, it's about creating a connected process that respects the complexity of the data. And once you see these building blocks clearly, you can actually design an automation flow that accounts for each input and removes the clutter from the reporting process. Which leads to the next question. What does that kind of flow look like in practice when you start wiring it together in Power Automate? Turning complexity into flow with Power Automate. What if your report built itself the moment data was updated? No more chasing down spreadsheets, no more digging through ticketing tools, and no more late-night formatting sessions. Imagine a system that listens to your data sources and assembles the pieces into a report automatically. That's not hypothetical. That's exactly the role Power Automate fills. It acts as the central engine that connects all those scattered systems, makes sense of the different formats, and outputs something that's ready to use without all the manual wrangling. Right now, most compliance teams wrestle with a familiar problem. The data isn't in one place. A risk log might be tracked in Excel, control evidence lives in SharePoint, and incidents are stored in Dataverse or some other case management tool. Each piece is fine on its own, but when you try to combine them, the pain becomes obvious. It's tedious, error-prone, and slow. You can almost guarantee that by the time everything gets merged, at least one file is out of date. That means critical risks can actually go unseen because they only show up in an end-of-month snapshot. Picture this scenario. An incident is logged in Dataverse on the 10th of the month. It shows that an access control failed and needed emergency remediation. For the next 3 weeks, that information is invisible to senior leaders because the compliance report isn't due until the end of the month. By then, the remediation may already be complete, but the delay in visibility means nobody had timely awareness of the underlying weakness. That's the gap Power Automate is designed to close. Instead of waiting, the system captures the new entry as soon as it appears and feeds it into the reporting pipeline. The first step is building connectors. Power Automate comes with pre-built connectors for systems like SharePoint, Excel, and Dataverse, which means you can establish a live data stream from each without custom integration. You point it to your SharePoint document library where evidence is being dropped, connect it to the Excel file holding your risk register, and link it to the Dataverse table where incidents are tracked. Once those links are in place, the flow can check for updates at specified intervals or even respond to changes in real time. Suddenly, your data doesn't feel hidden across silos, it becomes accessible. But raw data isn't enough. One of the biggest pain points is inconsistency. Dates may appear in different formats, categories may use slightly different names, and status fields might not align from one source to the next. Step 2 is standardization. Within Power Automate, you can define transformations, so every timestamp flows into a consistent format, every incident severity is assigned to a standard scale, and every category label maps to the same controlled vocabulary. This is the part analysts usually spend hours trying to fix by hand. Automation strips away the inconsistencies so reports actually line up. From there comes aggregation. The flow can take validated data and push it into a single SharePoint list that becomes the foundation of your reports. Instead of the evidence folder, the Excel sheet, and the incident log each living separately, they get layered into one consolidated dataset. SharePoint acts like the staging hub where everything is organized and displayed in a unified structure. That becomes the dependable source you can point reporting tools to, confident that it's always current and complete. Here's where the payoff starts to show. With just that flow in place, you can generate a draft report automatically. Every time new evidence is submitted, every time a risk register entry is adjusted, or every time an incident is logged, the consolidated list updates. Then Power Automate can trigger the creation of a document in Word or a record in Power BI that pulls the fresh data in. It's no longer someone's job to manually collect the pieces. The system compiles them and gives you a report that's already aligned. It doesn't mean the review process goes away, but it means reviewers are focused on evaluating truth, not fixing formatting. The effect is simple but transformative. What used to be static reports that trailed the business by weeks can become living tools that update as the organization changes. Compliance leaders gain visibility in near real time, and operational managers can act on incidents without waiting for the next cycle. Power Automate turns reporting from a reactive exercise into a proactive capability. That unlocks a bigger question, though. If the system can handle this kind of complexity today, what happens when reporting automation is only the start? That's where advanced use cases start to push things beyond reports and into strategy. Scaling the automation from reports to strategy. If automation can handle the basics, what's stopping businesses from scaling it to strategy? The answer has less to do with technology and more to do with mindset. Most organizations stop at the point where reports are produced on time with fewer errors. On paper, that looks like success. But if you think about what automation is actually doing, continuously gathering evidence, normalizing it, and pushing it into a central system, you realize that process creates opportunities well beyond turning out documents. The mechanics that save hours of repetitive work can also be aimed at reshaping how governance itself is practiced. Let's start with the missed opportunity. A lot of teams treat automated reporting as the finish line. They've built flows that consolidate data, generate PDFs or Excel packs, and hand them off to stakeholders. That's useful, but it's also the most basic application. Stopping there is like buying a smartphone and only using it to make phone calls. The reporting flow is not the product, it's the foundation. Once the data starts moving through Power Automate pipelines in real time, you have flexible streams that can be directed anywhere. Limiting that to static reports undersells the potential that's already in motion. Take conditional reporting as an example. Not every stakeholder needs the same level of detail. Executives want summaries, clear risk levels, impactful trends, and high-level insights. Auditors, on the other hand, expect to see detailed control evidence, timestamps, and complete incident logs. If you're still distributing the same file to both groups, you're wasting attention on one end and missing detail on the other. With Power Automate, you can build branching logic that generates different report versions from the same dataset. The executive package might include graphs and concise summaries, while the auditor version includes an appendix with raw entries. One flow, two outputs tailored for the audience. Now picture automated escalations. Instead of waiting until reporting season to find out an incident breached policy, you set a rule in your flow. If a new entry in Dataverse carries a high severity label, Power Automate automatically sends an alert to compliance officers or even escalates it through Teams or email. You don't rely on someone remembering to flag it. The system handles that consistently. Reporting is no longer a lagging indicator. It becomes the actual trigger for action. That shift alone changes compliance from static oversight into active governance. Visualization brings another layer. Once data feeds flow automatically into SharePoint lists or Dataverse tables, nobody says the only destination should be a PDF. Connecting those same flows to Power BI means compliance data can appear in dashboards with live updates. Instead of waiting weeks for reports, leadership can track control health, risk trends, or incident counts in real time. Patterns that might have gone unnoticed in static quarterly reports become visible the moment they emerge. That turns GRC from a snapshot into a moving picture that leadership can watch evolve. This is where insight gets interesting. Once you move beyond static outputs, automation extends into predictive compliance. With a continuous stream of standardized data feeding into analytics, organizations can spot risks before they fully materialize. Repeated small incidents flagged by flows might indicate a control eroding long before a major failure occurs. Trends in ticketing volume or evidence changes can highlight systemic issues. Automation creates the backbone for proactive risk management, where governance stops reacting to the past and begins anticipating the future. Think of it as a feedback loop. Every report produced, every incident flagged, and every set of metrics aggregated feeds back into the system, sharpening the organization's ability to govern. Instead of compliance being a reporting deadline treated as an event, it becomes a continuous cycle of measurement and adjustment. Flows can be refined as risks evolve, thresholds recalibrated, and dashboards extended with new metrics. For the first time, governance becomes something that adapts at the same pace as the business, not months later. And that is the point most teams miss when they stop at generating PDFs. Automation doesn't just shave time off reporting cycles. It changes the scope of compliance itself. It allows leaders to act in the moment, shape risk strategies proactively, and align governance activity directly with business objectives. Time saved is only the first win. The bigger win is creating a system where compliance reporting becomes strategic intelligence. Once you see it through that lens, the future is less about tools and more about direction. The organizations that thrive will be the ones that stop thinking of automation as a back-office efficiency project and start seeing it as the operating model for governance. And next, we'll connect this transformation back to the bigger picture of why the future of compliance management depends on shifts like these. The big picture. Why this matters beyond reporting. GRC automation might look like a neat shortcut for compliance reporting, but the truth is it does much more than that. Reports are just the most visible part of governance. Beneath the surface, the way you gather, standardize, and act on data shapes how the entire organization responds to risk. When you build automated flows with something like Power Automate, you aren't just solving a tactical reporting problem, you're creating the foundation for a governance system that adapts as fast as the business environment shifts. That's the difference between treating automation as a tool and understanding it as an organizational capability. The common misconception is that all this complexity comes down to reducing the load on compliance teams. It's easy to frame automation as purely about saving time, less copy-paste, fewer spreadsheet reconciliations, fewer late nights at quarter end. And yes, those wins are real. But they're also surface level. The larger value emerges when you realize that automated compliance data isn't just easier to put together, it's always current. That consistency and currency ripple out far beyond the compliance department. Suddenly, your outputs aren't just static documents for auditors, they're live insights that leadership, investors, and partners are using to make calls in real time. Consider this from an accountability perspective. Investor confidence often hinges on whether governance structures look robust and whether risks are transparent and well managed. A quarterly report that's stitched together manually might satisfy a checklist, but it rarely inspires confidence in a high-stakes discussion. An automated process that surfaces issues as they happen does more than prove readiness. It communicates control. It shows that your organization doesn't just react to audits once a year, but actively governs risk every day. For investors deciding between two companies in the same space, that difference has weight. Audit readiness is another place where the impact is immediate. Think about how audits usually play out. Teams rush to prepare documentation only to spend weeks answering follow-up questions because something was missing or inconsistent. That scramble can add cost and erode confidence in the process. Automated reporting changes the posture completely. Evidence is already captured, time-stamped, and organized because the flow ran when it needed to. Instead of gathering documents retroactively, you walk into an audit with a standing dataset that's always ready. That readiness doesn't just reduce stress, it speeds up certification processes and reduces exposure. Then there's decision agility. Modern business leaders can't wait months to know whether a control is weakening or a risk category is trending upward. By the time a static report surfaces those details, the business environment may have moved on. Real-time automation means leadership can open a dashboard and see today's numbers, not numbers from last quarter. That agility is a direct competitive advantage. It allows executives to pivot strategy, allocate resources, or engage regulators proactively based on proof rather than gut feeling. In highly regulated industries especially, that capability shapes everything from contract negotiations to market positioning. And here's where the bigger picture sharpens. In a hybrid, regulated world, data silos are the norm. Teams are distributed, systems multiply, and finding the single source of truth gets harder every year. Automation is the only realistic way to stay current. Organizations that still rely on manual reporting are not just wasting time, they're putting themselves at a strategic disadvantage. Competitors who build reliable pipelines for compliance data don't just operate faster, they build reputations as transparent and trustworthy partners. That's where automation stops looking like a cost-saving exercise and starts looking like a market-level differentiator. If you're listening to this, you already know that the smallest workflow choices scale up into enterprise outcomes. How you handle reporting flows isn't just an internal IT project. Those choices echo into board discussions, investor calls, and regulatory inspections. When flows are inconsistent, trust erodes. When flows are stable, trust compounds. And when those flows tie into larger analytical tools, you unlock AI-driven insights that are far harder to achieve through reactive manual processes. Instead of looking backward, the system learns and predicts. That's the realization most people reach once they've experienced reporting automation firsthand. The entry point might have been, let's cut down the time it takes to produce our GRC packet. But once the flows are running, it's clear that what you've built isn't a report generator, it's the backbone of a governance model that doesn't wait for deadlines. Reporting automation becomes the launching pad into smart, continuous oversight. It's no longer about fixing a reporting cycle, it's about redefining governance itself as a dynamic capability. So let's close with what this really means for you now. Automating GRC reports with Power Automate isn't about chasing shiny tools. It's about building a governance system that can adjust at the same pace as your business instead of holding you back with outdated cycles. When reports generate automatically, they stop being a weak point and start becoming a source of confidence. If you haven't already, map your first flow today. Even something simple like pulling incidents into a single list. And if you want to go further, subscribe here for tutorials on scaling strategy. The future of compliance isn't manual, it's intelligent, connected, and continuous.